perfect body. I want a perfect soul. I want you to notice when I'm not around. So fucking special. I wish I was special. But I'm a creep. I'm a widow. What the hell am I doing here? I don't belong here. Whatever makes you happy, whatever you want. You're so fucking special. But I'm a creep. I'm a widow. What the hell am I doing here? I don't belong here. I don't belong here.
appreciate you. Please do. I actually sent you the wrong video. Okay. But, so yeah. Okay. But, I know that guy who did that. He did this so the first video. This video is the video that explains what floating is. If you want to watch that, you can watch it and see how it's he doesn't go through it, but he kind of okay. And then you can just get into that. And yeah, from what I could see, watching through it, I didn't see much of that. Okay, so that's probably that's we take it out, okay. Figure it out. And then, do you have the parts control again? Yeah, we have the parts control. But yeah, like, but it looked like they needed that. I would need other parts just to help Please drive safe. Yeah, I will. Thank you. Yeah.
Obey traffic laws, be alert, and use voice commands while driving.
Long drive home. I'm gonna bring you with me. My YouTube channel, people, which is actually just me. But yeah, maybe we'll listen to the news. I don't know. Actually, probably definitely gonna listen to the news. I'll put links, I guess, in the thing for those music that I do not own the rights to, and I guess we will watch some news stuff.
Hello again to you, Sean. This is something we've been talking about this morning. Confirmation that they have plans to send. How significant is it?
Yeah, it's worth remembering President Zelensky in Ukraine, if they are to prevail in this war, they need to get onto the offense. There's been much talk about a spring offensive, but if that is to work, they desperately need tanks. Now, they have a lot of tanks, but they're all former Soviet Union tanks, which are relatively vulnerable, particularly if they're going to go on the attack against Russia. So what they need is modern tanks to be able to, for this spring offensive. There's been lots of speculation for days that the UK will give up some Challenger 2 main battle tanks that are shown here. One of the features of this tank is been around since the mid-90s, but it's got this chopper armor on it, which will take a direct hit from a relatively modern T-72 Russian tank and won't destroy it. The downside of this is that these tanks, there's not that many of them about. The only users of them, the UK and Oman. We've only got, I think, 227 of them. I understand 143 are due to be upgraded to Challenger 3. Leaves only about 79 that are available that might have been disposed of, so there is the potential. But when you have a tank only available in small numbers, the spares are only available in small numbers. It's a specific round that's fired from these because it's got a rifled barrel, so they're not available in big numbers either. You know, it does appear that if our Prime Minister has confirmed today that in a conversation with President Zelensky that the UK is going to provide, we understand, about 10 of these tanks to Ukraine, woefully short of the numbers of tanks that they'd actually need, which is probably well over 100, but of course there just aren't the numbers of those to provide. The key reason for this, though, appears to be unlocking European opportunities to export the Leopard 2 tank, which is much more broadly used in, it's shown here, there's over 2,000 of these in service with 13 different countries. Therefore, the Ukraine could benefit from a significant number of these without significantly denting the stocks from Europe. The challenge is it's a German tank, and the German therefore holds the licensing for this, and they will only agree to people exporting it. So by the UK taking the initiative, it means Germany potentially will follow suit. We understand Poland's looking to potentially go up to 14 of these tanks very smoothly. The challenge, of course, these take a long time to train people. So if you're going to have these tanks, the one thing putting the tanks into the Ukraine, it's quite another getting trained crews ready. And if they want to mount a spring offensive, they need to get moving with these deployments.
Okay, let's go back to Soledar, this salt mining town. What do we know about what's happening there? Who controls it?
Well, the fighting's been very, very fierce, hasn't it? And the question is, has it fallen or not? And what does that actually mean? For some, it means that there's no longer any Ukrainian troops in there, just Russian troops. From a military perspective, this is more of a judgment about who controls the town rather than actually getting rid of everybody. There's no doubt there are still Ukrainian soldiers in there. Russia's got to do some mopping up, but almost certainly the Ukrainians have suffered a defeat in Soledar. The big issue, though, is that they've exacted a huge toll on the Russian convicts. The casualty rates are astronomical, and actually almost certainly the worry was that Russia would then suddenly capitalize and encircle Bakhmut, whereas in fact it looks almost certain they're going to have to catch their breath, and it will be a while before they're ready to take that next step. For me, though, the really interesting part of this is that the Wagner group, who was the lead for the battle here, claimed victory a few days ago, but both the Kremlin and Ukraine said Soledar hasn't fallen yet. Yesterday, the Kremlin said that it had fallen, and even though Ukraine doesn't agree with that at the moment, but it's all about Prigozhin here. That's the real issue, and it was only literally at the end of the battle, President Putin acknowledged the great support that the Russian army had done, the assault troops, the armoured vehicles, the artillery, didn't even mention the Wagner group. And it was only 6 hours later that he acknowledged that they had actually been a part in this.
Okay, Sean, thank you so much. We're going to leave it there. Thank you.
Okay.
welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about Argentina. Now, Argentina historically was an economic powerhouse. Following World War II in 1946, it was the 7th largest economy in the world. But unfortunately, over the course of the last 75 years, the economy of Argentina has dropped down the league tables, predominantly due to taking on far too much debt and a lot of economic mismanagement. And in today's episode, I want to talk to you about some really interesting developments. Firstly, on the relationship between China and Argentina. China is offering cash to help Argentina out of its latest crisis. And once again, this raises the question of a potential debt trap situation. So we'll go through exactly what the relationship between Argentina and China is and what China has offered. And then we'll talk about the ongoing debt restructuring negotiations that Argentina's got itself into to try to avoid going into a 9th default on its debt. And yes, you did hear that right. Argentina has defaulted on its debt 8 times historically. And I get asked the question a lot about what happens when a country defaults on its debt. What does a collapse look like? And I think what's been going on in Argentina over the course of the last 20 years or so is a really good example of what a collapse looks like, because Argentina first defaulted on its debt back in 2001 and has been in a state of turmoil since then. So in today's episode, we'll have a look at a few facts about Argentina. We'll look at what's going on with regards to inflation right now, because it is off the scale in Argentina. We'll look at what's been happening to the Argentinian peso, because that's devalued. We'll talk about the debt and the debt history of Argentina, because Argentina is a great example of a country that's got good natural resources, it's got lots of exports, it's in a positive balance of trade, but it's got itself into a disastrous economic position by taking on far too much debt. And that debt burden is really an albatross around the country's neck. We'll talk about the restructuring of the debt that Argentina's got itself into. And I'll tell you a really interesting story about US vulture funds that came in and bought a lot of Argentina's debt and then took them through the courts to try to force them to pay out on those debts. I'll give you an update on the situation with regards to the IMF, because Argentina is currently in another round of negotiations with the IMF about a bailout facility. And then finally today, I'll wrap up with my summary. So what I think is likely to happen in Argentina over the course of the next 3 to 6 months, and what the implications of this are for the global economy. But before we get started on all of that, as usual, I'm going to ask you for a thumbs up if you're enjoying the content. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Don't forget, I always include chapters, so if you don't have time to watch everything, you can pick and choose what you'd like to see. And if you'd like to support the channel, please have a look below where you'll find links to YouTube super thanks and membership, as well as Buy Me a Coffee, Patreon and Amazon shopping links. And as always, I'd like to say thank you so much to everyone that has supported the channel. I genuinely appreciate it. Argentina is located in South America and is the 2nd largest country by landmass after Brazil, and is the 3rd largest country by population, with a population of around 46.5 million, with the 2 largest countries being Brazil with a population of around 216 million and Colombia with a population of around 51.6 million. The name Argentina comes from the Latin word argentum, which means silver, and the country does have valuable natural resources, including silver, copper and lithium. However, it also has rich fertile soils, and agricultural products such as soybean, corn and beef represent the biggest export revenue earners for Argentina. The first explorers from Spain arrived in Argentina in 1516 in an ill-fated mission where they were killed by the local natives. However, by 1536, Argentina was taken over as part of an enlarged Spanish empire, and Buenos Aires was established as the capital of the country. In 1808, a civil war erupted in Spain, and this subsequently led to Argentina declaring its independence from Spain in 1810. Now, before we go on any further today, I want to talk to you about today's sponsor, Atlas VPN, and let you know about the huge discount that they're currently running, whereby you can get a 3-year subscription for only $1.99 per month. If you use the internet without any form of protection, you leave yourself exposed to tracking, hacking, and advertising. Using Atlas VPN protects you from all of these. Atlas VPN provides you with comprehensive security and is used by more than 6 million people worldwide. So it's great news that you can stop hacking and tracking and data breaches. But what's also amazing news is that it can save you money and open up a whole new world of entertainment. because it allows you to change your location, which gives you the opportunity to get better deals and to access content that may not be available in your region. Atlas VPN is available to use on unlimited devices for one subscription, and Atlas VPN is currently offering an amazing 3-year deal whereby you can get full protection for only $1.99 per month, including an entirely no-risk 30-day money-back guarantee. So to purchase this exclusive Joe Blogs offer, please click in the description below. Now, as I mentioned at the start of the video, Argentina has a long-standing history of debt, and in 1824 it took its first overseas loan of £1 million, which at the time was a considerable sum of money, from a British investment bank called Barings, which later became really famous all around the world when a trader called Nick Leeson actually broke the bank. He was doing lots of unauthorized trades, got into a huge loss position, and the bank actually became insolvent. But in 1824 it was solvent, and it provided a £1 million loan to the Argentinian government, and that loan was provided to build up the infrastructure of Buenos Aires as a major international port. But unfortunately, at that time, Argentina got itself involved in a war with Brazil and spent all of the money funding that war. And as a result of that, in 1827, it was unable to service the debt that had been provided by Barings and went into its first official default. Now, at that time, Buenos Aires had actually ordered 2 large frigates to be built in England. And under the all-encompassing debenture that Barings had been given, the bank seized both of those ships as part of its debt recovery program. And it's reported that one of the reasons that Argentina actually lost sovereignty of the Falkland Islands to Britain was that it didn't have enough maritime capability to be able to defend them. And this potentially was linked to the fact that it had lost these 2 ships as part of this debt deal. Now, this debt deal wasn't actually repaid until 1904, so 80 years later. And the total amount that Argentina ended up paying was $8 million, so 8 times more than they actually borrowed originally. And the reason that I wanted to mention this is that from a very early stage in its independence, Argentina has been building large amounts of debt that it's been struggling to repay. Now, before we go into get into a bit more detail on the economics and the debt and the current situation, I thought I'd have to mention the fact that Argentina won the Soccer World Cup in Qatar in December 2022, and one of their greatest players ever, Lionel Messi, lifted that trophy and actually won the Golden Ball for being the best player. And I think anybody that watched that final would say that it was one of the greatest football matches in history. Such an exciting day and deserved winners. This chart shows the movement in the inflation rate in Argentina over the last 12 months. And you can see that 12 months ago, inflation was running at 51%. So that was an incredibly high rate. However, over the course of the last 12 months, it has progressively increased and is now at 92.4%. which is an incredibly high rate for any country, but particularly for a developed country, because Argentina is in the G20. It's classified as being one of the 20 largest economies in the world. And this table shows the current rates of inflation for all of the G20. And you can see that the only country that is anywhere near Argentina's 92% is Turkey, which actually has reduced the rate of its inflation to 64% in December. So Argentina really sticks out like a sore thumb on this list. And this chart shows the highest rates of inflation for every country in the world. So you can see that there are actually some countries that have higher inflation than Argentina. But when you look at which countries they are, Venezuela has been sanctioned by the vast majority of the G20 for the last few years. And as a result of that, inflation is now running at 156%. And Lebanon, Syria and Sudan, which have inflation of 142%, 139% and 103%, are all war-torn countries. So their economies have been decimated by the civil conflicts. So Argentina has the 5th highest rate of inflation of any country in the world. And if we expand the inflation chart out to cover the last 25 years, you can see that Argentina has been experiencing significant problems since 2015. The rate of inflation has been above 20% in virtually every year over the last 7 years. And it also experienced extreme inflation in the early part of the noughties after it defaulted on all of its debt obligations in 2001. However, if we expand the chart out to cover the last 70 years, you can see that in 1990, there was an extreme rate of inflation. Inflation was recorded at being above 20,000%, which represented a period of extreme economic turmoil during which the peso collapsed in value and was devalued. Now, one of the reasons that Argentina is in such a dire situation today is because of all of the debt that the country has built up over the course of the last 50 years or so. During the 70s and 80s, Argentina went through a period of political instability and poor management of the economy, and the debt burden grew from around 4 billion at the start of the 70s to more than 52 billion by the end of the 80s. Now, at that time, concerns started to rise about the potential for Argentina to default on all of its debt, and that's what led to the 20,000% inflation that we saw. And in order to fix this problem, the president at the time decided to introduce a policy whereby the peso would be pegged against the US dollar on a one-to-one basis. So this was called uno a uno. Now, following the introduction of this policy, inflation did calm down and everybody became comfortable with the peso because you could exchange it on a one-to-one basis, and this was backed by the Argentinian government. But the problem that Argentina had was that in order for that system to work, they needed to hold large amounts of US dollars, which they didn't do. So in order to get those dollars, they started taking on more and more debt in the international markets. And by 2001, the total debt in Argentina ballooned to more than $100 billion. Now, people started becoming very concerned. And in November of that year, there was a run on all of the Argentinian banks. Everybody wanted to remove all of their money because they were concerned that the government was about to collapse and that they would lose all of their life savings. Now, in order to stop this run on the bank potentially escalating into a full collapse of the economy, the Argentinian authorities announced that the maximum withdrawal was $250 per week. Now, this announcement resulted in mass panic across the country, not least because a lot of the economy was working on a cash basis. So a lot of workers in the agricultural sector were being paid cash in hand. And because those companies could no longer access any of the cash, they couldn't pay anybody. And as a result of this chaotic situation, the IMF, which had provided loans of around $10 billion, announced that it was no longer allowing Argentina to draw down any further debt, which essentially meant that Argentina had no access to any further capital to service the $100 billion plus of debt that it had. And on the 23rd of December 2001, Argentina officially defaulted on all of its debt obligations and announced that it was scrapping the one-to-one peg of the peso against the US dollar. Now, this chart shows the exchange rate between the Argentinian peso and the US dollar, and you can see that the rate today is considerably higher than one-to-one. $1 US today trades for around 180 Argentinian pesos. And if we look at what's happened over the last 5 years, 5 years ago, $1 US was trading for 17.7 pesos. And 12 months ago, $1 was worth 103 pesos. So you can see that there's been a serious devaluation in the Argentinian peso over the course of the last 12 months. And this really reflects two things. Firstly, ongoing concerns that Argentina may default on all of its debt obligations again. And secondly, a high level of dollarization within Argentina. Now, we've talked about dollarization before on the channel, but this is a situation whereby the local residents of a country decide that they no longer have any faith in their own currency, and therefore they would prefer to use other currencies. So just to give you a brief explanation as to why dollarization does occur, if you think of yourself living in Argentina and you've got 100,000 pesos in the bank, and you're